making the radiators, the front end, even the exhaust, are all about to be tested for the first time.
Mat Armstrong just did the one thing Bugatti does not want him to do. Not the chassis split. Not the part sourcing. Not the first drive. Not any of the technical achievements that defined every previous chapter of this story. The one thing. The specific action that Bugatti has been working to prevent since the moment they locked the VIN and refused the parts and had their CEO make a 10-minute Instagram video explaining why it was impossible. The one thing that all of it, every corporate tool and every public statement and every refused request and every no, was ultimately designed to stop. Mat Armstrong just made the Bugatti Chiron per sport road legal. He got it registered. He got it through IVA. He put a number plate on a car that Bugatti declared a total loss and had their technician fly from France to confirm could never be driven on a public road outside their authorized network. And now it is on a public road. With a registration. With insurance. Legally. Permanently. And Bugatti can do absolutely nothing about it. Think about what road legal actually means. Not in the technical sense. In the specific, concrete, legally binding sense that changes the entire status of this car and everything this story has been building toward. Road legal means the argument is over. Not just the engineering argument about whether the car could be rebuilt outside the factory network. Not just the sourcing argument about whether the parts could be found without Bugatti's supply chain. Not just the safety argument that Mate Rimac made on Instagram about why what Mat Armstrong was attempting was dangerous. All of those arguments were already answered by the running engine and the first drive and the 8 brands and the 7.7 million views. Road legal answers the final argument. The regulatory argument. The argument that even if the car could be fixed it could not be certified. That even if the engine ran it could not be registered. That even if the first drive happened it could never happen legally on a public road with an IVA certificate and a number plate and the full weight of UK road law confirming that this car is exactly what Mat Armstrong always said it could be. Roadworthy. Certified. Legal. Done. But before we go through exactly how road legal happened, before we walk through every obstacle between the first workshop yard shakedown and the moment a registration plate went on a car that Bugatti's entire corporate apparatus had tried to prevent from existing outside their network, we need to understand what the IVA process actually demanded of this specific car. Because individual vehicle approval for a salvage rebuilt US specification Bugatti Chiron per sport is not a standard process. It is not the IVA that a modified hatchback goes through. It is not the process that most IVA assessors have encountered before in anything resembling this configuration. It is an assessment of a vehicle so unique, so specific in its history and its construction and its modifications, that the person conducting it was required to evaluate a car that combined the engineering of one of only 60 examples ever produced with the specific solutions that an independent rebuild without factory support had generated. The custom radiators. The cross-reference parts from 8 brands. The Valvetronic exhaust. The one-off interior. The Audi A3 airbags. The Mercedes-Benz Pyro fuse. The CNC machined gearbox bracket replacement. All of it. Assessed. Against the standards UK road law requires. And all of it passed. The BCM reset story is where the road legal journey began in earnest. Because the body control module reset was the specific technical wall that defined the final phase of this build. The proprietary procedure that required Bugatti's tools and Bugatti's authorization and that Bugatti had refused to provide. The second no. After everything. And the resolution of the BCM reset problem is the moment that the final impossible became possible in a way that nobody outside Mat Armstrong's workshop fully anticipated. Because the BCM reset did not ultimately require Bugatti. It required a third-party solution. A specialist with the specific knowledge and the specific tools to interact with Bugatti's electronic architecture without factory authorization. Someone who had developed the capability independently. Through the same combination of determination and creative engineering that had characterized every solution this build had produced. The BCM reset happened. The warning lights that had been populating the dashboard since the first drive cleared. The systems confirmed their calibration. And the car that had been mechanically running and physically driving became electronically complete. Ready for assessment. Ready for the plate. Now let us talk about what Bugatti was actually trying to prevent. Because the road legal moment clarifies this in a way that every previous chapter approached but never quite arrived at. Mat Armstrong said it himself in the Cars and Money podcast with Rob Moore and Carl Hartley. They have to be the most expensive car. They have to go to the most wealthy customers. They do not want you exposing them and taking them on head-to-head. That is the one thing. Not the rebuild itself. Not the technical achievement of putting a crashed Chiron back together. The exposure. The specific, public, permanently documented exposure of what is inside these cars and where those contents come from and how the assembly works and what the barriers actually are versus what the manufacturer claims they are. That exposure. The Honda Civic radiator cores. The Mercedes-Benz Pyro fuse that Bugatti installed themselves. The Aston Martin squib. The 11-pound Amazon bolt. The 14 titanium bolts that split the chassis without specialized equipment available at only 2 facilities in the world. All of it. Exposed. Publicly. Forever. And road legal means the exposure cannot be undone. Cannot be contained. Cannot be managed by any corporate communication strategy that Bugatti deploys after the fact. The car is on the road. And the story of how it got there is permanent. The Cars and Money podcast interview is the revelation that changes how you understand the entire conflict. Because Mat Armstrong sitting down with Rob Moore and Carl Hartley and speaking honestly about what really happened behind the scenes with Mate Rimac and Bugatti produced the most candid account of the conflict that has ever been made public. And the most important detail from that account is not about the technical challenges or the sourcing solutions or the creative engineering that made the rebuild possible. It is about the internal disagreement at Bugatti. Mat Armstrong's feeling that somebody else within Bugatti had vetoed parts being sold to him. That Rimac had allegedly told him it could be done. That the decision to lock the VIN and refuse the parts was not necessarily Rimac's personal preference but a corporate decision made above or around him by people whose primary concern was the brand risk rather than the technical reality. That internal complexity, that suggestion that the manufacturer's position was not as unified as the public-facing statements implied, reframes everything about how the conflict unfolded. And it makes the road legal outcome even more significant. Because if the opposition was never entirely unanimous inside Bugatti, the car being road legal represents not just the defeat of a corporate strategy but the resolution of an internal argument about what was the right way to handle a situation that nobody at Bugatti had a playbook for. The brand risk argument that Carl Hartley raised in the podcast deserves to be understood fully, because it is the most honest version of Bugatti's position that anyone outside the company has articulated. The hypothetical scenario. Mat Armstrong's repairs are not up to scratch. The car causes an accident. The headline is Bugatti crash injures family of 4. Not Mat Armstrong crash. Bugatti crash. Because the car has a Bugatti badge. And the brand association between the car's badge and the outcome of any accident it is involved in is not something Bugatti can control once the car is on a public road rebuilt outside their network. That is a legitimate concern. It is the legitimate concern that sits underneath all the corporate language about safety and authorized networks and the necessity of factory repair. And Mat Armstrong understood it. He pushed back on it. He offered to waive his rights. To accept full responsibility. To sign every waiver and take on every liability. Because he knew that his repairs were up to scratch. Because he had spent months documenting every decision and every solution and every component choice in a level of detail that no factory repair ever made public could match. And the IVA assessor, the person whose job it is to evaluate whether a car is safe for public road use independent of any manufacturer's preference, agreed with Mat Armstrong. The car passed. And the brand risk argument was answered by the regulatory process that exists specifically to make that assessment independently of the brand. The EU right to repair directive context of the road legal moment cannot be ignored. Because the car achieved road legal status with the July 31, 2026 deadline approaching. The deadline that makes Bugatti's business model of factory-only repair legally untenable across every EU member state. And achieving road legal status before that deadline means something specific and significant. It means that the precedent is established in the period before the law changes. That the proof of concept, the demonstration that a Bugatti Chiron per sport can be independently rebuilt to road legal standard without factory support, exists in the legal landscape that the directive is designed to reshape. And that precedent, established before the law required it, is more powerful than a precedent established after the law changed. Because it demonstrates that the change the law is making was always achievable. That the barriers Bugatti maintained were always more about commercial control than technical necessity. And that the independent rebuild community did not need the law to succeed. The law is catching up to what Mat Armstrong already proved. The Bugatti customer service comment is the detail that encapsulates the entire conflict in 8 words. Bugatti, the customer service hasn't been as fast as the cars. 8 words. Said about the Veyron situation. Applied equally to everything that happened with the Chiron. A manufacturer whose cars set the standard for automotive performance and whose customer service set the standard for corporate obstruction. And the road legal Chiron is the permanent answer to both versions of the Bugatti standard. The car is as fast as Bugatti designed it to be. The customer service was as unhelpful as the conflict documented it being. And one of those two things is a problem. The other is the reason the story existed at all. The Messi-Ronaldo dynamic that Mat Armstrong described in the podcast is the human truth at the center of the road legal story. Cordial. Respectful at the fundamental level. 2 people who love extraordinary cars. Who understand what it takes to build them and to rebuild them and to push the limits of what is achievable with them. Finding themselves on opposite sides of a public argument that neither of them entirely controlled and that the internet amplified far beyond what either of them intended. And now that the car is road legal, now that the argument has reached its conclusion in the most definitive way possible, the Messi-Ronaldo dynamic has space to evolve. Because rivals who